Hey everyone, it's me, Stephen J.B. Davis, your land specialist and residential realtor in Central and beyond Central Kentucky at this point. Today we happen to be in Southern Ohio with this awesome guy next to me. His name is Zack Vucurevich. Did I get that right?
You got it.
He is the founder and owner of Whetstone Habitat, and we're going to start talking a little bit more now and in the future just about land management, habitat management, and a really interesting word, stewardship. Zack and I have been talking for about the last hour, and it's been so. I have a couple of questions for people who are watching. So a lot of the folks that talk to me and reach out to me have never owned land before, and they may be urban or suburban. They come from all different places, but they're interested. And if you can see where we are, I mean, we're standing by a pond. You can probably hear some frogs making their calls, and there's a lot of green around. And visually, that can look overwhelming to someone who there's just leaves, right? There's leaves and grass everywhere.
It all looks the same.
Right, it all looks the same.
And in the winter, it's all dead.
Right, it's like it's brown and then it's green.
Yep.
So like for someone who is, I guess, trying to take their first bite out, and maybe they've just bought 20 acres, but they've never managed anything like that. Like, before they necessarily call you, what are just some basic things that they need to keep in mind about sustaining the property in a healthy way? I mean, we talked a lot about sort of like not absentee, but people who make sanctuaries maybe, but really they just have some woods that they never touch, and they don't clean, and they're not paying attention to some of the things that will keep that area the healthiest. So what is it that someone in principle might be able to do as a beginner landowner to make their place the healthiest?
My best advice, which I harp on a lot more than some of the other guys do, is just getting rid of the invasives. Figuring out what's not supposed to be here and coming up with a game plan to get rid of it. Because what ends up happening is they're not preyed upon by, it's funny talking about something being preyed upon that's a plant, but like that's what happens is the deer comes out and they'll select our native vegetation that they evolved to eat.
Yep.
And oftentimes they'll bypass all the non-native stuff.
Yep.
I keep going back to deer, but like they're our biggest mammal on the landscape, so they have a really big impact on anybody's property, no matter where you're at. So getting rid of invasive species, kind of learning those invasives. If you can get rid of those and get those under control, it just makes room for our native stuff to grow.
So when he says invasives, you've seen it. I'm sure you probably have it growing on your fence or know someone who does, but we're talking about stuff like autumn olive, honeysuckle, kudzu. Yes, I mean, a lot of these things were introduced to this part of the United States and various other parts to do things like prevent soil erosion after mining in places like West Virginia or in Eastern Kentucky. So basically Googling those things and
you can look up, like the NRCS has a good website that has a lot of
Thank you for saying NRCS. So many people it's a great government resource. I know
nobody knows, but that's another thing for landowners. Reach out to your local NRCS office. Usually every county has one.
Yep.
And there's money to be made for the landowner. There's cost share programs that most people aren't aware of. There's a lot for invasive species removal. Yep. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to incentivize landowners to take better care of their land. So they'll help foot the bill for your herbicides that you might be using, or if you're not using herbicides, they'll help compensate your time out there pulling those weeds. So they're a great resource. Look into your universities in the local area. Reach out to your county extension,
offices.
Soil and water. Just start to familiarize yourself with people in the area. Make some of those connections.
For sure.
Then get you going down the right path.
The government is not always bad.
No.
Especially where natural resources are concerned. There's a wealth of information, and just about all of it is free. So the NRCS really, I'm so happy you said that, because you don't, like, Google is great, but like if you just go to the NRCS and search there, like, you will find a wealth of information for really just about anything concerning the earth. And so then on the opposite end of the spectrum, and most people aren't calling me for this type of advice, but the people that I work with typically are looking for places to hunt. I mean, I work with a lot of I'm loving all of these frogs. But they are looking for recreational places, and some of them are more in tune to good management standards for keeping a healthy herd of deer, which is usually what we're talking about here in Kentucky, or at least in my region of Kentucky. But some of them maybe have never really managed a herd in any sort of like meaningful way. So when you start to get into habitat management specifically for game that you might hunt, what is like kind of that besides the invasive species, where's maybe like the next leg up, or maybe just a principle that's unrelated to just keeping a healthy environment? Like, what would you?
Diversity is king. So a couple things come to mind. Diversity is always going to be king for all wildlife. Nothing likes monoculture. You look around at some of our soybean fields and corn fields, and like, great, yeah, you might see deer out there all summer long munching away, but what happens after those fields are harvested? It's just a patch of dirt for 6 months, all the way until it gets planted again in the spring. So it's not helping out your pollinators. It's not helping out your small mammals. It's not helping out pretty much anything.
Yeah.
I mean, and with the amount of herbicide going down, and like, I mean, it's hurting the microbes in the soil, the earthworms. It's drying the soil out where the earthworms can't really get by anymore, which means they have to till it up because it's no longer being aerated. So like diversity is always going to be key. So whether that means diversity in your fields, how you're managing those, or in your woodlot. If you have a single-aged forest, everything's the same age, maybe get in there, start taking some trees down, getting some sunlight hitting the forest floor, starting to generate some new growth, some young forest habitat within your single-aged stand.
Because that's going to give either food, right, or cover for those deer. I mean, one or the other, or maybe both.
Yeah, in different species. So like if you have an opening in the forest, the next thing you know, you're going to have starting some. First, your brambles are going to start popping up, your blackberries, your raspberries. Then you might even be lucky enough to have some plum thickets start forming, or some.
These are called what, serration stages? Is that the word?
No.
When you're like the
successional.
Successional.
Yeah.
Serration's a knife.
Different
successional stages.
Stages in forest development, but I'm always preaching you want to be on top of getting a good, diverse landscape out there. So real quick, I just want to talk about when I'm saying diversity and different management techniques. Like here we have, over on this side, we got a native prairie restoration site. This was planted, I think 4 years ago. It was burned this last March, so 4 or 5 months ago. And you can see it's coming back great. We got some big blue stem coming up. We got some brambles coming in here with the raspberries. We got the cone flowers. There's not a ton of woodies coming up in it, but that's typically what happens when you burn and it's managed property. If you look over across the path on this side where it hasn't been mowed in a while, it hasn't been burned, we got way more blackberries coming up. We got a bunch of honey locusts. We got some autumn olive, Bradford pear, a lot of ash trees creeping in. It's turning into a young forest. When we're talking about succession of woodlot, it would start out as a grassland, it would turn into briars and shrubs, it would slowly start to turn into more and more trees till those trees eventually become a forest. So based on your burn intervals, or whenever you mow it, or how you manage these native prairies, will kind of dictate what sort of plant composition and structure you have, which is good. It's all diversity, which is what we're going for. The next thing that came to mind was when managing for any wildlife population, you need to figure out what the limiting resource is. What's the lowest hole in that bucket? So oftentimes, like what I find, especially in the Midwest, it's going to be late winter forage. Like, what are the deer eating after all the soybeans
when everything's
and corn
dead?
Yeah, everything's
gray.
Brown, and it's like they're chewing around there. Most, like a healthy deer herd's browsing a lot on woody stems, which is going to be like the twigs, and they're going to be browsing on blackberry stems and like stuff that doesn't look very appetizing, but that's what gets them through the winter. So if all your trees are out of a deer's reach on your woodlot, what's a deer going to eat all winter long? There's nothing within his reach. So by topping some of those trees down, and again getting diverse structure and composition, you're having a bigger impact on holding those deer, making sure they're healthier longer throughout
diversity.
Diversity. So,
and to your second point, you said finding what the lowest.
It could be water. Oftentimes around here in Kentucky, like, water is not usually a limiting resource, but it can be. I was working in New Mexico, and that was our biggest limiting resource for the wildlife out there, was water. But yeah, typically what I run into time and time again is that late winter, early spring, before anything starts to green up.
That food
making
source?
Sure they got something to eat then. It could be fawning cover. Like, that's another one where, again, where's a fawn gonna hide? Where's the doe gonna put her fawn when she has to go browse?
If none of those babies grow up to be adults, then there's nothing to hide. I mean, if they all get, if there's a bunch of predation around, like coyotes or whatever, I guess someone could run it over with
Black
a lawnmower,
bears. Yeah.
black bears. Yeah, so that makes sense.
Yeah, figuring out what that lowest hole in your bucket is, fixing it, and then move on to the next one. Work your way up. But it's super important you have a game plan together. Especially like I like to be, yeah, I'm super thorough with my clients and my management plans because I want it to be something where even if they end up having to move and sell the property, they can then hand that management plan off to the next landowner.
Right, and that's super valuable.
He'll be able to pick it up and pick up where you left off. So,
right.
So I like to write it out really clear. How to do something, when to do something,
yeah.
What are the techniques you're using, how do I carry that technique out?
Yeah. So if you're trying to raise your game value, maybe you want to sell your property or you are looking for the value in a property, it's all about how it has been managed, how you have been managing maybe if you're selling it, and really someone like Zach, I mean, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to get with him and he wanted to get with me just so we could just talk about like land. That's like the common denominator here, but you want someone who's going to be detailed. You want someone who's going to, of course, come to the table with all of this knowledge, not just sort of anecdotal experience. I mean, we're talking like down to the biological level of the environment. You know, not just what you see, but what's in it. What's the protein structure of that, and how are you going to, you know, enrich the life around that the land is supporting. So thanks for watching. Please leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe, and please feel free to share.